Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to Reddit Roast number 16, I think we're at. John, great to see you again.
Happy Friday, Sam. Looking forward
Happy
to
Friday.
diving into this.
Absolutely. Interesting week this week. We've got a founder who blew through their savings on a previous venture. We'll see how that's going to affect their MBA plans. We've got the GRE God who scored a 337. Pretty nice. We'll touch on how that applicant can make the most of that strong GRE. And we've got a few younguns who are looking to build the best profile they can. These are applicants who are applying a year from now, and they've got a year and they're thinking, how do I make the most of my profile? So, John, let's dive in with profile number one. Rate
Let's do
my
it.
chances for M7. So, 8 years of work experience on the higher end, mainly in project management, but also consulting and professional services. Helped start a major manufacturing company that is partnered with local government, operational now, and is the third largest manufacturer in the region. We don't know exactly what region that is, I don't think, but still. GRE is 332. Nice. Undergrad is 2.7 GPA. Masters in data science, 4.0 GPA. Background, international Oceania. I will never pronounce that right. Background basically means Australia, New Zealand, that part of the world. Worked on projects in 15 countries, deals and projects over $500 million. Lots of volunteer experience, managing teams. Issues, undergrad GPA. We're going to touch on that. Financing. I've lost my savings in failed ventures and operating one of my passion projects. I'll be 33 at the start of the MBA. Want to do an MBA to build my network. Okay. Provide better academic foundations. Sometimes feel like it's all talk. Skills development, credibility. Okay. Career pivot. Finance. Maybe move into the policy space. Okay. Dream is to have my own firm doing FDI for development. Help provide a bridge between policy, development, and business. What are the chances? What are the challenges? And what are the chances of a scholarship? PS, recommendations for admit consultants in the region, AU, New Zealand. So it looks like this is an Australian or Kiwi applicant. John, let's start with the overall profile. How do you see this profile?
This is an intriguing profile, Sam. I'll start with the academics first. That
Okay.
332 is nice, but that 2.7, as we've discussed in roasts past, is going to hurt a lot for his profile, even with a 4.0 master's GPA. Look, the reality is that AdComs focus on the undergrad GPA, and a 2.7 is going to be pretty damaging. The master's GPA will help allay concern, but they'll still have to take that in for rankings and class metrics and so forth. So I am bearish on the academics. We can talk a little bit about how M7 schools look at it in just a bit. Professionally, I like OP's mix of strategy consulting and the operational side. You don't tend to get the mix of those with applicants applying to business school. The fact that OP has started and executed a project with scale is a big plus. And hey, failed ventures, not the rosiest thing to show off, but they can make for really golden essay topics, especially if OP is able to talk about what he's learned and bring that to his next ventures. Demographically, 33 is on the older side. Adcoms try not to talk about age when they assess candidates, but I can sometimes feel that they'll address it in a different manner. With that said, Oceania background is a plus. We don't see a lot of that applying to business schools. Yeah, that's a little bit about how I feel about this candidate. Sam, back to you.
Don't you think that because it's an international applicant, there might be a little bit more leeway on that GPA because they're not having to feed it into rankings?
Yes. Um,
Still not great.
I think it's still not great. I think anything a sub 3, even if international, is still not great. But that's a good flag, Sam. Just because it's an international GPA, that probably won't factor in. I think 2.7
Yeah.
to 4.0 average out to like a just below a 3.5. So I think I think there's some redemption there. I still think it will be a pink flag overall.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I was doing a little bit of research into this from an age perspective. As you say, it's a slightly
Hmm.
sensitive topic, 8 years of work experience. Um, I was looking at to give applicants everyone watching an understanding of why that's potentially an issue. Um, the I was on the Booth website. As you guys know, I like to use Booth as a benchmark for a lot of this stuff. Average of 5 years work experience. So that means average of 5 years work experience at matriculation. On day one of the program. And OP, it looks like, has over 8 already. In other words, if OP is applying in this September, we're currently in May 2025. If OP applies in September of this year with a view to getting admitted the following year, that's going to be more like 10 years of work experience at matriculation, which is double the average of Booth, one of the benchmark M7s. So what I'm half anticipating here, John, and this is something that happened with one of my clients last year, is OP okay, we'll talk about M7, but if you're going to apply to M7, there's a chance that actually these schools are going to give you admits or give you an offer to the EMBA program. With 10 years of work experience, you're perhaps more suited to the EMBA program. And that's exactly what happened to a client of mine last year. Applied to a Booth MBA, had about the same number of years work experience, and received an offer from the EMBA program. Now, that's up to you whether you feel that's a worthwhile investment, and that's a whole other conversation. But that kind of speaks to how schools think about the age factor. You might still be a qualified applicant, but let's put you in the pool. Let's put you in the program that suits your level of experience. Might happen here, just to bear in mind. Okay.
Yeah.
The other point I want to talk about is the extracurriculars, John. We don't know what they are. OP says lots of volunteering experience. We don't know what exactly that is, but could you maybe paint a picture about how OP can use this volunteering experience to strengthen an M7 application?
Look, I think the reality is that extracurriculars for the purpose of business schools applications and undergrad applications are a little bit different. It's great that you're giving back to your community. Business schools, wouldn't scoff at the idea of seeing that. But I think these extracurriculars are more so used to reinforce someone's narrative, or maybe it's someone's interest in a particular goal. Let's say, you want to go into a certain industry that you don't have exposure to in your current job. Perhaps, what you do in your free time can indicate to the admissions committee that you have a budding interest in this space and you're genuinely and well equipped to enter it once you graduate from business school.
Yeah, exactly. I think, there are some essays that really lean into extracurricular work.
Hmm.
I'd argue that what matters most and why, Stanford's
Yeah.
classic essay, what matters most to you is quite unlikely to be something that's coming up in your office. It's
Hmm.
more likely to be something that you're dedicating hours of time to, and that you are, really sort of focused on in your extracurricular work. But that does not mean that they are counting the hours. You see this in undergrad applications where there's like
Sure.
number of hours of volunteering experience and like higher hours
Sure.
is better.
Yeah.
It's not so much about the actual number of hours. It's more about what you've been doing and using that as a signal and as a signpost, and using that to write really interesting essays like what matters most.
Of
Interesting.
course.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So basically, it comes down to what is that volunteering experience?
Hmm.
Is it
Hmm.
relevant to the goals? If it is relevant to the goals and the narrative, then that could be strong. If it's unrelated, it maybe doesn't
Yeah.
add quite so much value. So we'll see on that one. Okay. Interesting. Let's talk about these goals, John. So career pivot. So as we say, he's been helped start a manufacturing company that's partnered with local government and wants to pivot perhaps into finance role, or maybe move into the policy space. My dream is to have my own firm using FDI for development. I believe FDI is foreign direct investment. How do you feel about those goals?
I'm not see. I think there probably were elements of his goals in what he did in the project manager operational role. I'm not seeing much about foreign policy here. Maybe he's had to deal with it when trying to start up this manufacturing facility.
Yep.
Maybe it was in other ways, but I don't see a direct tie necessarily from what he's done prior to what he wants to do next. I suspect that there are elements of it somewhere, but as I read it today, it's not the dots are not connecting for me.
Yeah, it might be that this partnership with local government is like, I was setting up this company and
Mm-hmm.
had to get like approval from XYZ authority. Some local
Mm-hmm.
government needed to give a permit or whatever. And I saw the obstacles facing business due to policy. And I want to tackle those as a policymaker. And there's maybe an angle there. I could kind of see how that might work. I
Mm-hmm.
I personally I prefer the policy angle to the finance angle. It
Mm-hmm.
does I'm not seeing strong finance credentials here. I'm not, a CFA level one or something along those lines that
Mm-hmm.
sort of, that
Mm-hmm.
that speaks to like a passion and a real interest in the hardcore finance skills. I'm not seeing
Mm-hmm.
anything like that here, and that makes me a little bit
Mm-hmm.
dubious about the finance angle. But I
Mm-hmm.
do like the policy move, especially if OP's had some really relevant experience with the local government. That
Yeah.
could work. And if that's the case, might be an
Mm-hmm.
option for, I'm just thinking aloud here, but maybe like a dual degree program
Yeah.
with like an MPP component to it.
Sure. Yeah.
That might also be interesting. And OP, if you're watching and you think that might be an interesting avenue, encourage you to have a conversation with Nanako, who's our in-house kind of dual degree specialist, who did hers at Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School, and would be able to provide some interesting insights there. But I think, look, overall, M7 chances. What do you reckon, John?
I think it's a little bit of a wash. I'm still a little bit hung out. I'm still a little hung up on that GPA. But if there are interesting stories and narratives from OP's time building this facility, and unique life experiences from Oceania, I think OP might have a shot. Um, I think it's worth applying, but I also think if OP were serious about business school, that they should also look at T10s and T15s. Now, going back to your earlier point about applying to some of these dual degree programs, I think the reality is that some of these dual degree programs are looked at independently, and there are some that are looked at in concert. And if you have a unique enough profile that bridges both, and if the consideration process is in concert, then that's where OP would shine more than they would if these applications were seen independently.
Interesting. Okay, so school choice is important when considering for dual degrees.
Correct.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think I'm aligned with you. Like I'm on the goal on the level. I think M7 might be tough, but I do think that there are some T20, T15 schools that would like the Australian, New Zealand angle, the strong GRE, and might be willing to look past the undergrad GPA because it's not been submitted to the rankings. I think there's a chance there, but I do think this is a case for apply broadly and apply to as many schools as you can, because it's going to be hard to know in any given year, any given intake, who's going to care about that GPA more. So that's my advice on that. Okay, John, should we move on to the next profile?
Let's do it.
Entitled GRE God. Right. Profile review, male 23, fairly young, looking to apply to full-time MBA in 2027. So this would be, presumably this is starting in 2027, applying in 2026, which is like a year and a few months from now. Would appreciate insights on my competitiveness and fit. Goal, pivot to MBB post MBA. Okay. Target schools are kind of M7 and the top European programs. Tuck in there as well. Undergrad, business degree from Canada's fourth ranked university, GPA 3.33 overall, 3.55 in his major. Very low in the first year due to switching from a French background. So there's a French Canadian story here, right? So moving from from the French part of Canada to the English curriculum, and had a
Mhm.
very strong uptrend on the GPA. Okay, GRE 337, maximum score in the quant of 170. That's really nice. Work experience 3.5 slash 4 years of work experience by the time of matriculation, assuming that's 2027, at a F200 financial services company. So quite niche company there, specializing in risk management, M&A, and infrastructure teams. Started on their graduate program and has worked up. Volunteering, growth and strategy advisor at a non-profit supporting entrepreneurs in Canada. That's interesting. Mentoring children from poor backgrounds. International exposure, has lived in 5 countries. Interesting. quite short but dense profile review there, John. Give us a how are you seeing this?
I like this profile overall, Sam. We'll start with the academics because my God, indeed. Well, 3.33 is middling, but the upward trajectory definitely does help. Definitely onus is on OP to address this in the optional essay.
Mhm.
That 337 is a chef's kiss. I think, absolutely divine. Nothing more said. Professionally, M&A has different flavors, and I would love to understand, and maybe we can have a discussion about this, Sam. What specific function OP has within M&A? Is it more of a sort of a back office function, the mid office function, on the front lines of M&A? What are the key responsibilities? Because that makes a difference in terms of how OP is evaluated as a finance candidate.
Yeah.
Demographics, pretty interesting. International, love the move from French Canada to Western Canada. Living in 5 countries is a plus. Demographically, on the younger side, I think, would obviously find ways to, override this, in maturity, find ways to weed out leadership experience and what he does at work. But overall, pretty solid. And yeah, I think OP has a promising profile here. I would just love to unpack it a little more, especially when it comes to the work experience.
Yeah, I'm aligned on that. There's a question mark over the sort of the M&A side in particular. Okay, so I mean, yeah, let's just touch on that GRE one more time.
Sure.
337 that's got to be like what, high 90s percentile, right? 99,
Hmm.
98, like that's outstanding. OP, congrats. Especially given that from my reading of this, OP is not mother tongue English.
Hmm.
If we're switching from a French background to an English curriculum, it sounds like OP's mother tongue is French. To score a 167 verbal in English as a second language, that's really, really good work. Okay, I I think let's talk about goals because I think this that combined with the career with the work experience is the big unknown here and the big question mark for me. The goal of pivoting to where is it? These goals pivot to MBB. It doesn't fill me with it. I'm not particularly inspired by this. I'm not sure
Hmm.
this is necessarily the right angle. The reason why is okay, on the one hand, yes, the work experience has been at a financial services company, which there might be a consulting-ish angle to that. I imagine that if you're, doing kind of going to visit financial companies and saying like this
Hmm.
is how our product would fit into your ecosystem and this is how you can benefit from us, there's a bit of a consulting angle to that work potentially.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I'm wondering whether IB is more just having the IB narrative. It'll depend
Yeah.
on what sort of M&A exposure OP has had. You touched on this in your intro. If OP
Hmm.
has had exposure to front office, the M&A teams who are like modeling deals and bringing
Hmm.
in bringing in clients,
Hmm.
that might be a better goal. IB might be a better goal than MBB.
Hmm.
I think the bar is quite high for you to justify an MBB goal. You've got to have some really strong, relevant reasons and relevant experience there. And I think
Hmm.
OP's experience is more in the financial side. And I think
Hmm.
IB might be a more interesting angle. And I say this as somebody who went
Yeah.
through the investment banking grad programs at
Yeah.
several banks
Hmm.
and I really think they'd quite like that.
I agree. I am aligned with that. I think I am leery about MBB consulting. I think um, investment banking would be a closer and fit, and obviously it would depend on what he does, but I'm aligned with that, Sam.
Yeah. So then the question is like you're applying in for a 2027 start. You've got at least a year, more probably
Mhm.
18 months between now and your program. Like what are you going to do in that time? And I think this is an aspect that hasn't been asked explicitly in this profile, but I think there is room to improve, there is room to strengthen. And I think that the question then is how. I had a couple of ideas on this. I think the main thing is OP needs to build up professional experience in whatever his target sector ends up being. If he does decide to go with the MBB route, then building up experience in, for example, impact consulting would be really, really helpful to strengthen that argument. Look, I worked at a financial services company where I was going to meet lots of different clients, kind of like a consultant does. and I really enjoyed that aspect of the role, and I want to pivot into MBB consulting. Well, then they're going to need to see some real consulting experience, and I think something like spending a few months doing impact consulting, for example. You could go and you join an impact consulting firm and do pro bono consulting for startups or non-profits. That would be real valid experience that OP could do in the
Yeah.
next year or so and strengthen that narrative. Alternatively, if
Yeah.
OP goes the IB route, the investment banking route, like you and I have just talked about, then taking CFA level 1 is that kind of signal, that OP is really serious about this goal. I think schools would really, really like that. Those are the two things that jump to mind. Any other ideas?
Nope.
Hi. So that's on the goals side. I think we've covered that pretty neatly. Um, let's talk about schools. John, the school that really jumped out to me when I was reading this was INSEAD.
I
This
love that.
the bilingual English French they will absolutely adore. The
Hmm.
requirement is that you're kind of studying a third language, and I imagine that if OP's lived in 5 countries, he could probably make the case that he's studying, one of those other languages besides English
Yep.
and French.
Hmm.
I think, and also INSEAD has very strong placement in these traditional industries, traditional post MBA industries, consulting, bits of investment banking as well. I think INSEAD is a great fit for OP, and I think that's the school that jumps to mind. What are you thinking? Similar?
Yep. That came to mind as well. I mean that's gonna be a perfect fit for INSEAD's language requirement as well as, there are many essays that talk about, that would allow OP to really leverage his international experience.
Yeah, they literally ask, like, give us a list of your international experience.
Yeah.
There's I
Yeah.
think 6 cells where they're like, first place, and what were you like? Where were you, and what were you doing in this role?
Hmm.
In this place,
Hmm.
were you studying? Was it a work trip? Was it whatever? And you literally have your 6 most impactful international experiences. OP is going to have a dream time writing that essay. Anyway, good. I think we're clear on this case. Let's move on to the next profile, shall we?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So, Indian female finance/fintech role, aiming for M7 again in 2 years, John. So we're looking ahead
Hmm.
a bit here. Hi, I'm an Indian female candidate looking to apply to M7 programs in round 1 of 2027 intake, matriculating in 2028, so even further out this time. I'd appreciate your thoughts on my profile and how to strengthen it. Background is undergrad IIT, Tier 1 institute in India. We know GPA 8.4 out of 10, 321 GRE, 321. Work experience 1 year so far at a top UK-based investment bank, bulge bracket, working in a fintech-orientated role as a business analyst. Planning to take CFA level 1 soon. Sports seems to be a key factor in this application. Institute gold medal for excellence in outdoor sports, led squash and lawn tennis at national level competitions. Extracurriculars also focused on promoting women in sports and collaborate with NGOs to inspire young women athletes. Goals: transition to an impactful leadership role post MBA, possibly VC, private equity, or entrepreneurship in the sort of finance impact space. Question 1: what would be an ideal timeline and milestones for the next 2 years to build a strong M7 application? 2: should I retake the GRE? 3: what kind of extracurriculars and leadership experience should I focus on? 4: what can I do to stand out as a female Indian applicant in finance, which is relatively competitive? All right, John, let's start with a profile. How do you see this?
Squash, lawn tennis, bulge bracket, investment banking in London. This is a nice profile. But I think, yeah, on a more serious note, if we were to go, through her academics, I think the IIT name will go very far. We all know that schools would look at what location of IIT it is, and there's a hierarchy there, and also depends on what major you've gotten from IIT. But good brand regardless. I don't know why OP says consider retaking the GRE. With a 321, I think you should definitely retake it. Given your academic profile is already so strong with that brand name from that school. Professionally, we all know that OP is applying in a few years. I mean, so I would have considered applying when she's been promoted to an associate level plus. That would give her an opportunity to talk about her leadership experience, impact, with her firm. Demographically, still I would still consider her an ORM, given she's Indian born, went to Indian college. But being based in the UK definitely helps. Although there is an overrepresentation of people working in finance who are Indian in the UK, so watch out for that. That's my assessment of OP. Promising profile. I think there is potential down the line.
Hmm. Okay. And so let's talk first about um the milestone, the timeline. We've got these questions to focus on. What would be an ideal timeline and milestone? So could you lay out the MBA application journey for someone who's looking to apply in 2027 and matriculate in 2028, bearing in mind that they're going to be retaking the GRE?
Okay. Well, we one big caveat is that the GRE has I think it's a 5-year limit. I think even if you were to take it now, you're well within your rights to submit it come, application time. I think with 2 years to go, let's assume OP is applying around one in 2027. That's 2 years, right? So if she's been enrolled for 1 year, ideally she will have been promoted a year from now, which would give her a year of experience as the next level up from analyst to be able to demonstrate, the impact we want to see at her firm. So I think she'll be in a good spot. But that's just something to consider. If she doesn't have that, I would look into participating in, lots of these bulge bracket banks have ERGs, and she's very civic and extracurricular minded. So maybe strengthening her leadership roles within those groups and showing leadership in that way.
Cool. Yeah, I'm aligned. I think it's going to depend on the narrative. It's going to depend on the career narrative here, like the theme of the application. And it seems to me that reading between the lines, well, it's more direct than that. The theme here is promoting women in sports. That has
Hmm.
come up again and again, both in terms of the sports that she's involved in and the sports
Hmm.
that the goals that she wants to work on. Promoting women in sport is a narrative that we've seen work, right? I had a client last year who used a very, very similar narrative around wanting to grow, in her case, Formula One. Now,
Hmm.
if you think about it, Formula One is a sport where physical ability, like weight and strength of the individual, doesn't actually matter because you're in a car. So the
Hmm.
only barriers keeping women out of Formula One are really social. And so there's
Hmm.
a really interesting theme there around how to bring women into Formula One. I love that kind of that theme, and I think OP could really, really lean into that. So I
Hmm.
think in that timeline that you were just laying out, I think what's going to be really important is leadership experience in women's sports.
Hmm.
Really credible leadership experience in women's sports is going to position OP to make a case that she's the right person to lead this drive.
Hmm.
What would that look like? Leadership role in any of these clubs. There's sort of a mention of that here. We don't know how much leadership is involved, but like, organizing tournaments, rallying players, all these sorts of leadership activities within sports would strengthen her case. And I think that's what sort of aside from the professional promotion and professional development, that's the other thing OP should be doing in that time frame in those 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Sam. Soft spot for me, I was the captain of my club squash league when I was, a working professional applying to business school. So,
Uh-huh.
uh, a keen area of interest for mine. I think to take that further, potentially having her rally, maybe it's mentoring people in squash, part of these community clubs. Maybe it's organizing tournaments, growing awareness of the sport. Just thinking about ways to go beyond just, I was the captain of this club league, learning from my own experience. That's what I would have done if I had the advice of a top tier MBA consultant like yourself, Sam.
I taking that a step even further. If you can bring in the gender component to this as well, I'm imagining
Hmm.
something like establishing a mixed gender squash tournament, for example,
hmm
if one doesn't exist. For just that kind of inclusive sports leadership experience would be absolutely fantastic. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably the key question, the key sort of not so obvious thing that OP can do between now and hitting submit in 2027. Okay, question 2. Should I retake the GRE? You've already explained this. Undoubtedly, yes. That's not, yeah, it's not even really a question. 321 is way outside of where you need to be for M7. John, what would you like to see OP's GRE score being for a credible chance at an M7 given this profile?
I would say at least somewhere in the in the mid 320s, and I'm saying this because I think that's probably just going to be the minimum. You know, you're going to be competing against people applying from IIT with you know, GREs well into the 330s.
Yeah.
So uh, obviously she is may not be strictly considered from being part of that exact pool, but you are still an Indian-born IIT graduate. And so you would need to at least find, you know, score in a bracket that does not make the academics bracket a sore point in your application, and a mid 320s plus would do it. If I, if I were, you know, a coach, I would probably aim for even a high 320s.
Yeah, I had 328 in my mind as like as like a lower,
Yeah,
soft lower threshold for an
yeah,
credible M7 application, because
yeah.
even if OP is like has distinguished herself from sort of Indian applicants in India, all she's doing is throwing herself into the investment banking pool in London, and that they have strong test scores as well. So, however, whichever way you dice this, that's going to need that profile to be credible is going to need a strong GRE score, I think.
Yep.
Okay, interesting. What kind of extracurriculars and leadership experience should I focus on? We've covered this at length. How can I stand out as an Indian female in finance? Okay, again, we've already covered this a little bit, but just to emphasize, what most investment banking applicants lack is credible extracurricular experience. They're working
hmm
80 hours a week. They haven't got
Yep.
time to go and volunteer at a food bank, but OP does. OP, you
hmm
have clear passion and experience, extracurricular experience in this women's sports area. That's where you're going to stand out from the investment banking applicants. That's how. Is that really interesting women in sports theme where you can
hmm
bring your finance expertise and your sports passion? That overlap, that kind of zone on the Venn diagram that uses both of those is a small, narrow space, and that's where you're going to be unique.
hmm
Am I right, John?
Yep. I'm aligned.
All right, awesome. Okay, good. I think we've covered everything on that one. I'm going to just skim through my notes to make sure we haven't missed anything. Oh, there's one other thing I want to mention. Goals. Now, OP talks about possibly PVC entrepreneurship as goals. John, as an investment banking applicant, do you think PE and VC is credible?
I think so. Yes, I think that's a natural path. Um, Everyone always bristles at the thought of, you know, listing VC as their goal, just because, you know, the support for people going to VC is relatively less in among MBAs. But there are, you know, a credible amount of a credible many alums who work in VC, and so maybe couching it by saying corporate VC or, you know, tying it to a larger institution could help. If
What do you
anything,
mean by
I would
corporate VC?
well, like well, joining a company that already has a VC arm. So for instance, you know, the VC arm of a consumer products company, a VC arm of a fintech company, that tends to have better recruitment outcomes for people who come from top MBA programs and who have a background in finance.
That's very interesting. So what you're saying, we know from experience that that P
Mhm,
and VC is a difficult goal. It's the schools are wary of this because the VC companies, PE companies, they're small. They don't have structured recruiting programs. If you're going to get into PE or VC, it's going to be via your own network. It's quite a nepotistic industry. And what you're saying
mhm,
is that while that is tough, breaking into a Unilever or a
mhm,
Pfizer
mhm,
or whatever
mhm,
that have a VC arm, that
mhm.
is more achievable. And that's the company, the schools know, yes, we have alumni at Unilever. Yes, we have alumni at Pfizer. So they're a little bit less daunted by that.
Yep.
Interesting. Interesting. I love it. And maybe the dream is if that FMCG company also has some sort of overlap with women in sport. That might be
Yeah.
stretching it a little bit, but they often
Mhm.
have CSR initiatives in these kinds of
Mhm.
spaces. So if you can
Mhm.
find an FMCG company that has a VC angle that is also maybe a sponsor of Wimbledon, for example, like anything
Yeah.
that kind of can play the women's sports angle, that's
Mhm.
your dream. It's very niche, very specific, but I think that's what's needed. Okay, awesome. John, let's move on to the next profile. Okay, I like this one. This is an interesting dilemma that OP has. So, hi all, I'm a 25-year-old international candidate from Turkey. We don't see many Turkish applicants. I plan to apply to T15 MBA, non M7, okay, in about 2 years. Again, somebody applying a couple of years out. My top priority is getting a strong scholarship, 75% plus, hopefully. I currently work at Deloitte Consulting and have more than a year of experience. Just received an offer from a small boutique consulting firm in Turkey with about 10 people. Does strategy work? That does strategy work for US and European clients? The salary would be a significant bump up from what I'm earning at Deloitte, but the brand name is weaker. My dilemma: would leaving Deloitte for a boutique firm hurt my T15 MBA and scholarship chances? I plan to apply with. So at time of matriculation, I have 3 years of work experience, economics undergrad, 3.7 GPA, 330 GRE assumed. That assumed does a lot of lifting. I think you'd agree. Does the brand name of Deloitte matter significantly more than a higher salary and international projects at a boutique firm? Would love to hear thoughts from those who want to contribute. Okay, John, high level overview. I know there's some big gaps here, but how do you see this profile?
Mhm. Overall, I like this profile as well, Sam. I think that's a strong GPA. The valedictorian stamp is a big plus. I would obviously a GRE hasn't been taken yet. I would probably aim somewhere in the mid 320s. Um, Professionally, look, Deloitte is well regarded for foreign consultants aiming for M7s. The schools tend to prefer if you apply from a position of MBB plus. But I think the geographical diversity, being from Turkey would definitely help there. We can address OP's question about transitioning to a boutique. I think that could be a really good idea for a number of reasons. Demographically, URM from Turkey, that's a pretty obvious data point there. Overall, yes, there are gaps. We can talk a little bit about the goals here and her professional background. But I like this profile, Sam. Back to you.
Boom. His or her. I'm not sure we have a gender in there. Not sure.
No?
They.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair.
So yeah, look, lots to go with here. I think, as I say, that 330 GRE assumed is a bit where very wary of that. I often see this when we meet applicants who are early in the process,
Mhm.
and they say like, let's just assume I get a 330 GRE. You know how hard it is to get a 330 GRE? Like that's like 90 fifth percentile, and if you're Turkish, English might not be your mother tongue either, so you might
Mhm.
struggle on the verbal side. I'm a bit wary of that. I agree that if M7 or T15 with a substantial scholarship is what you're after, yeah, high 320s is going to be would be really nice. And that's going to take a few months, right? Don't underestimate how much work's going to be involved there. I would carve out 4 months of solid study time to
Mhm.
do that. Okay, on the ORM side, yeah, look, I agree with you on the
Mhm.
Turkey aspect. I had a client last year who was Turkish, female Turkish, who actually we have a video on our YouTube channel who I interviewed, who absolutely smashed it. I really think that there are not that many Turkish applicants, and I think
Mhm.
that given its strategic position, etc., I think schools are interested in having Turkish people in the program. So I think
Yep.
that's going to do a lot of lifting, and I really like that person. I think that's going to be nice. Let's talk about this move. This is the essence of this. Currently working at Deloitte Consulting, about a year of experience, has an offer from a smaller firm, better pay, Europe and US clients. John, would you take the offer?
I I think I would. And I would because it's not like you're moving away from a super well. I think Deloitte is a great brand name, but I think there's an equal opportunity to do. I think there's an opportunity to do work that leads to bigger impact and greater geographical exposure. Um, and obviously the salary bump, I think schools would understand why OP made the move that they made. And I think that shows an effort to make decisions that help grow their own capabilities. Um, and yeah, I mean I would go ahead with it.
Interesting. So you're saying on the schools will understand that salary bump. So to be clear, for those watching, schools, when you're entering your information, your employment information, one of the boxes it asks for is your salary. So
Hmm.
schools will see that salary uptick. So that will answer to them, that will answer a lot of like, why did you make that move? Big salary
Hmm.
bump, questions answered. I also think, John, I mean, maybe I'm being a bit cynical here, but like Deloitte is a well-known brand, but it's well-known not in a like elite way. It's well-known in a
Hmm.
mainstream way. And so
Hmm.
it's not like you're even leaving a crazy good brand to go and do this. It's
Hmm.
it's a bit meh. It's not MBB. It's Big Four.
Yep.
It does sound like it's like OP's working within the consulting arm of Deloitte, which is more
Hmm.
sort of quite well respected. But it's
Yep.
not like OP's leaving McKinsey to go and join some obscure
Yep. Hmm.
consultancy that no one's heard of. There's less opportunity cost than that. Um,
Yep.
let's talk about the 75% scholarship. That's quite a big ask, isn't it?
That's going to be a tough ask, especially for folks who are international. I think there would be reasons for why schools would be interested in a candidate like OP. I think, having that demographic is a big part of it. I also think maybe having differentiated unique goals would as well. But in order for them to feel better about that scholarship, OP would need to have would really need to make good on their promise to score a 330 plus on that GRE.
Yeah, right. And I think even then it's going to be that's a big ask.
Yeah.
I think OP a 30% scholarship, 40 on a good day with a bit of negotiation, multiple offers,
Mhm.
etc. But I think 75% for an international is tough. Is going to be tough.
Great.
OP's not applying to M7, saying non M7. Do you agree with that?
I don't think OP should not apply to M7. I think OP should apply to a handful of M7. I don't see a reason why. Um,
Particularly if the 330 comes through, right?
Correct, correct. I think it will come down I think it will come down to the GRE. But if OP is able to nail a fairly good GRE, even if in the upper 320s, I think they should really consider applying to an M7 program.
Yeah, I do. I think it should be included in the mix. Think
Yeah.
about it strategically. Yeah, like, okay, M7 is going to be extremely competitive and you might not get that 75% scholarship offer that
Hmm.
you're hoping for.
Hmm.
But if,
Hmm.
if scholarship really is what matters for you and you are open to T15, having
Hmm.
an M7 offer is going to give you
Hmm.
a lot of scholarship negotiation leverage further down the
Yeah,
line. So let's talk about how
totally.
that would look like. Let's say you get an offer from, in fact, actually, I've got a great example of this. Client a couple of years ago, and again, there's a video of this on our YouTube channel, got offers from NYU Stern and
Hmm.
Chicago Booth. Now, Chicago Booth is an M7, NYU Stern is T15, exactly the difference that we're
Hmm.
talking about now. That client had got a full ride offer from NYU and used it to negotiate with Booth. And in her case, she got the scholarship raised at Booth to I think it was 120K. So you can negotiate back and forth with T15s and M7, but obviously doing it the other way would be even easier. If you went to NYU and said, "Look, I have an offer from Booth. Come on, it's time to pay up. Give me some scholarship money to make this decision easier." Obviously, not in those words. That would be a strong negotiation ploy. So I do think OP should be considering M7 schools, even if it's just from a scholarship negotiation perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. There's one other question I have, John, on this, which is the consulting goals. So, as anybody who's watched Reddit roasts in the past will know, we're always a little bit skeptical of going into MBB consulting as a goal. Um, the here. So where's the goal? Mm, mm, mm. I think it's actually in the comments somewhere. I think OP has made clear that the goal is consulting, and I think that's right. I think that's right. I think it sounds like OP genuinely does enjoy consulting, doesn't it, John? If OP is going
Hmm.
from Deloitte Consulting to another consultancy firm, it
Hmm.
does sound
Hmm.
like OP has the credibility and the experience in
Hmm.
consulting
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
And if OP is looking to pivot into, like, I want to stay in consulting, but into a bigger brand, better company within the consulting sphere, that actually is quite a strong case. And I think
Hmm.
of the few people we recommend to use consulting as a goal, I think OP
Hmm.
is one of them. Would you agree?
Yep. I think especially if you're able to identify specific assets or specific capabilities, verticals within consulting, I think, schools would see it as, okay, OP is familiar with the consulting space, they will really, take advantage of this, of, gaining exposure to, you know, this part of the business, especially because OP would have had experience consulting, with US and EU clients, if they were to take that job, versus just, OP is trying to get into MBB. I think the goals click for me. I think the
Mm.
path makes sense. It's just being hyper specific about what within MBB they're interested in, how they will help, how those experiences would help ultimately in the long-term goal and align with presumably a strong narrative.
Yeah, right. I found the comment here. It's in the answers to in the comments lower in the thread. I'm finding I stay in the US, find a job in consulting, also open to opportunities in IB and as a product manager. But I'm already in consulting and enjoy the work. If you're already in consulting and you enjoy the work, pivoting to IB, that's doesn't make sense as far as your
Hmm.
narrative goes. I mean, maybe
Hmm.
apply, do some IB applications, throw some applications out there once you're on the MBA program. Likewise for
Hmm.
product management if you want. But both of those
Hmm.
are going to be seen by adcoms, I think, as quite a
Yeah.
quite a stretch. So I think consulting makes a lot more sense. We'll upvote that. Why not? Okay, John. Next profile. Chances for CBS or NYU Stern. We have a New York hopeful here. 34 years old, finishing undergrad in the US after career in Korea. Hi everyone. I'd really appreciate any insights about my MBA candidacy. I already hold a bachelor's degree in economics from a Korean university. 9 years of work experience in retail and e-commerce at a large Korean company. We know from later on in the comments that is Hyundai, the company that's been referred to. During my undergrad, I originally planned to double major in business, but I had to forego that plan after receiving a full-time job offer in my final semester. After marrying a US citizen, I moved to the US and decided to complete my business education. I'm currently pursuing a second bachelor's degree in finance at Zicklin School of Business. I expect to graduate in fall 2026. Now preparing MBA applications for a fall 2026 entry, ideally aiming for CBS, NYU Stern, so I can start my MBA right after graduation from my other program. Oof, a lot of university there. Concerns: I'll
Mhm.
be 34 at the time of enrollment, currently a full-time student and not working professionally. Given my background and non-traditional path, do I have a realistic chance at CBS or Stern? Would my 9 years of work experience still be valued? Thanks for your input. Okay, John, interested to hear what you have to say about this profile.
This is an interesting one. I, I think the one big question mark that I have, and we can discuss this after my run through, Sam, is why pursue a second undergrad degree given,
Right.
OP already has an economics degree with a 3.9 from a respectable Korean university. With that, look, it's a good GPA. With a mid 320s plus on the GRE or a 665 GMAT, I think that could pit OP in, a good spot. But look, if you're going to get a second US degree, would the school also look at your GPA because it's an undergrad GPA from a US institution? Probably, that they'll probably need to take it, because that's US based. So if OP is doing really well in school, that's a plus. But I'll be really careful there.
Yeah. So
Professionally,
just jump in. So 3.9 out of 4.5 was the GPA.
oh,
3.9 out of 4.5.
okay,
So I'm not familiar with the Korean system, but that sounds pretty solid.
yeah, yeah. Professionally, look, I think Hyundai is a well-known brand name, but it looks like OP's role tends to be more in that coordinator promotions function, and not as not n- not quite as well respected, I would say, versus roles in strategy or general management, uh, analytics, finance, and so forth. So, with that, I would like to see a little bit more along the lines of impact and strategy. I don't know what progression has looked like over OP's 9 years. Hopefully that there was some room for him to take on an ownership or leadership role. Demographically, Korean, I mean, that's relative. I wouldn't say it's overrepresented. I would say it's in some ways underrepresented depending on the context. I think the military experience, I'm assuming OP did it in the military just because, 9 years of work experience and he's 34. That would be, I think that would be strong to present it as a package. So I think there are a couple of things that I like about OP's profile. There are more things that give me pause about it, Sam. I think notably it's going to be that second degree as well as maybe looking more into the impact of his work experience. But over to you.
Yeah, I guess on that degree comment, like my knee-jerk reaction when I read this is married a US citizen, couldn't find a job. All right, I'll just go to university and study. And
Hmm.
then maybe even in the same predicament again, right?
Hmm.
Graduating from the second bachelor's degree, still can't find a job. I'm going to go and do an MBA. Now I've been cynical, but that's sort of how I'm seeing this and how I imagine a reader would see this.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, that's not ideal. And I would encourage OP to like really focus on explaining why this MBA is required, what additional knowledge and value is OP going to get that he hasn't got from his bachelor's degree in finance at Zicklin. That's going to be key, and I think maybe an optional essay would be that sort of
Yep.
be the right place to write that.
Yep.
Yeah.
If that's the case, Sam, I'm curious why OP isn't pursuing a master's in the U.S. instead of a second undergraduate degree. This is just giving a little bit of pause, but
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, you mean having done studied undergrad in Korea, why not
correct,
do a
correct,
master's now?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure. We don't know the info. Okay,
Hmm.
let's talk about the age. 34 at time of enrollment. That's
Hmm.
pretty old, right? But as you say, Koreans often, I think military service is either mandatory or certainly like a large proportion of
Yeah.
men do military service and maybe women as well. I'm not sure. So it's possible that that 34 at time of enrollment and 9 years of experience includes a couple of years of military service, which I think it's fair to say schools are going to kind of take into consideration. And
Hmm.
in a way, it's actually 7 years of experience, and maybe
Hmm.
the 34 is seen as 32 a little bit, and there's a little bit of slack cut there.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Again, a lot of like ifs and maybes here, and I'm a bit wary. Um,
Hmm.
okay. Retail and e-commerce is the experience. And I think Hyundai, it says in Hyundai, it says in the comments here, I was assistant manager, section leader. So there is some leadership experience there, I think, John.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
company was Hyundai, well known in Korea, obviously well known everywhere. Um, I think that the goals are going to be important here. What would you say, John, would make sense as goals if if you were going to apply to top MBA programs with this
Hmm.
experience at Hyundai? What would you
Yep.
put as your goals, or what would you explore first? If this was your client, how would you
Hmm.
explore goals? Where would you be leaning?
I would probably I would probably fall back in sort of like the function slash industry pivot. So foreseeably maybe staying in the automotive industry, working for a Tesla or General Motors in maybe like a slightly different function, maybe a product marketing manager. But I also
Not
can
dramatically
see
different function.
correct, 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 correct. But I can also see OP, considering the e-commerce side of things, right? So maybe it's if OP is able to establish proficiency and knowledge and experience in e-commerce, then I think many of the top e-commerce players are fair game. Maybe it's it can be anywhere ranging from Amazon to something smaller. But again, it will have to be something in the marketing realm. I wouldn't I potentially product management, but that would depend on how substantive OP's role has been as a assistant manager, the division manager. I'm seeing glimpses of it. I haven't seen his resume, so I wouldn't be able to make that leap just yet.
Wondering if there is a military component, wonder if
Hmm.
Amazon would be a good a potential goal from a retail
Sure.
and e-commerce perspective. Amazon are really well known. They love hiring military veterans.
Yeah.
The discipline, the hard work, etc. Those are traits that Amazon really value.
Hmm.
And if OP can bring a data component here, and that's the other
Hmm.
thing Amazon really care about is
Yeah.
decision making using data. OP might have some experience there. And I'm wondering whether an e-commerce, Amazon, maybe they have the I believe it's called the Pathways program, which is
Hmm.
quite well known and quite veteran friendly.
Hmm.
That might be an interesting goal.
Hmm.
Um, okay, if given all of that, do you think CBS and NYU are realistic?
I don't think so. I think maybe NYU, but CBS, I would say, would probably be a tough sell unless maybe J-term, which is that January start program. But even then, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I'm aligned. I'm aligned. I think in this case, NYU is the stretch, is the reach school, and anything below that, sort of
Hmm.
T25 level, that might be a
Hmm.
safety or a
Yeah.
safe option. Um, Interesting. Unemployed, John. That's obviously that's not a factor either, but it's not doesn't have to be here. I'm currently a full-time student, not working professionally, so
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
guess not really unemployed because he's busy, but isn't earning anything. How are schools going to perceive that?
I think I mean, it's understandable. Like I think when you're working or when you're a student, you're not technically allowed to work unless it's a work study thing within the school.
Uh,
Um, if with that, I would have loved to see OP at least do some on-campus things that maybe involve work streams that build on his prior experience. I don't see any of that, and that could be a pink flag.
Hmm, okay, interesting. So want something to maybe also something for an optional essay to get to bring
Correct.
up there. Okay. Also, there's no mention of extracurriculars at the moment, so we don't know what that what that could potentially contribute. Yeah. So I think we're aligned. I think M7 is going to be a stretch. I think anything that is sort of T15 and down from there, OP. I think
Hmm.
that's where you should really be focusing. Maybe apply to Columbia as a
Hmm.
to know, but don't invest too much in that. I think
Hmm.
that would be risky. Okay, John, last question for you. We have a bonus this week. I have a bonus. This applicant is choosing between the LBS 1 year MBA and Cambridge Judge, which is also a short MBA program. I've been fortunate enough to receive offers from two of my top choices, London Business School and Cambridge Judge. Now, the general advice is that LBS has a better brand, in the MBA world, larger alumni network, London location, and similar fees to Cambridge. But I applied to the 1 year program, the recently launched 1 year program at LBS. And this is where my dilemma begins. On the one hand, LBS is a 1 year program, better brand recognition, stronger alumni network. Not sure about bigger. Cambridge University has a massive network based in London, offering better proximity to job opportunities because the jobs are in London, not in Cambridge. Similar tuition fees. All right. And they could say, so then the concern is it's a brand new program at LBS with no established outcomes or reputation yet. Not the flagship MBA program, which is 15 to 21 months. Is there a risk of discrimination potentially from employers? Possible lack of integration from students within the program, as in, will he be able to overlap with the MBA, the normal full-time MBA program students, network with them? On the other hand, Cambridge Judge 1 year program is the flagship 1 year program there. Cambridge University has an established reputation, and obviously Judge does as well. But maybe it's
hmm
perceived as lower tier in MBA circles in terms of brand reputation, etc. What would you do, John?
Well, I think it really comes down to this. I think both are great programs. I think OP is right about assessing one versus the other. Look, an MBA from LBS is still an MBA. You don't have to tell employers what that brand is. And yes, some I think the 2-year MBA would probably have an established recruiting program. Maybe some companies or programs you apply to would dig into the exact nature of the program. But look, it's the same thing with CBS, full-time versus CBS J term. It's still an MBA program. Folks usually don't tell others that it's a J term program that they've graduated from. So I think with that in mind, I mean, I think the concern about it being a new program at LBS shouldn't be a concern. And since both are 1-year programs, I would probably lean LBS, but it's not going to be a significant jump for me because the Cambridge brand is also the Cambridge parent institution brand is also a big sell.
Mm. So what we're referring to here is Cambridge University is one of the oldest universities in the world, best, ranks very, very highly, always has done. And you get that credential, and on your LinkedIn, it'll say graduate of Cambridge University. And
Mhm.
that carries a lot of weight. But in business school world, and which is sort of the little ecosystem that you and I are immersed in, LBS traditionally ranks higher. But LBS isn't
Mhm.
attached to a wider university. So you're
Mhm.
only getting exposure to other business school students. You're not getting exposure to the wider university. And that might play a factor in Cambridge's uh,
Mhm.
favor potentially. The other thing I would say though is for LBS, it's not like I'm willing to bet you'll still have access to the same career coaches, for example. LBS aren't going to
Mhm.
set up a whole new careers team for this program. They're just going to bring their
Yeah.
existing careers team in, leverage the same relationships that the careers team has. I imagine the same alumni network as well, right? None of the alums are going to be like, "What? You graduated from the 1-year program? I don't want to talk to you. Bye." Like that's not going to happen either. So I think
Yeah.
most of the benefits you're still going to get. So that
Yeah.
sort of leans it back towards LBS. Um, the other factor I think is that it might be worth negotiating scholarships to break the tiebreaker.
Mhm.
So to use as a tiebreaker. So right now, there's no mention of any scholarship for either program, but both of these schools we know offer scholarships. And if LBS particularly are looking to fill this first batch of this program, they might be giving out scholarships as well. I would be quite aggressive here, and I would say to Cambridge, look, I have an offer from LBS 1-year program. I'm considering both right now. Are there any scholarships that I qualify for that you can give me that'll help make this an easier decision? And you say the same thing to the other school, and you put that ball in their court, see what happens. I would argue if one of them came back with a 30,000, so like I don't know, it's that like a 40% scholarship,
Mhm.
I would argue that probably swings it, right?
Yeah.
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 I think that's probably how I would approach this on the front foot. So given scholarships, go the direction the scholarship takes you, but without scholarships, I'm also leaning a little bit towards LBS here, just because of the network and the brand in MBA world. I hope that helps, OP. Feel free to get in touch if you are, would like some more information on that. We can give you a little bit more context. Okay, fantastic, John. Really, really nice to see you again. As always, really useful roast. Everybody watching, I hope you found that useful. John and I are taking on clients at the moment for round 1 of 2025. So anybody applying in September of this year, get in touch. We would love to meet you and learn about your profile and talk about target schools and evaluate where we think you would be suitable for. And yeah, John, I'll see you next week.
Roast you next time, Sam.
Roast you next time. See ya.